Hello, people of Earth and beyond. I'm here today to talk about the Three Percenter movement, the Prepper movement in general, and also the broader issue with right-wing extremism here in the United States. So, for those of you who are not familiar with the Three Percenter movement, I'm going to bring up this excerpt that gives a pretty basic outline of what these guys are. The Three Percenters are a patriot movement paramilitary group that pledges armed resistance against attempts to restrict private gun ownership. Adherents and supporters have been associated with threats and acts of violence. Like other patriot groups, they depict the federal government as tyrannical. Their name refers to the disputed percentage of American colonists who took up arms against the British during the Revolutionary War. The Three Percenters have a loosely defined membership and a decentralized organizational structure. Seemingly anyone can use the label. There are overlapping Three Percenter organizations, including local, state, and regional leadership structures that coordinate actions and decision making. The Three Percenters were co-founded in late 2008 by Mike Vanderboe, who was active in 90s Alabama militia groups. Vanderboe has said, "The 3% idea, the movement, the ideal, was designed to be a simple, powerful concept that could not be infiltrated or subjected to agents, provocateurs, like many organizations that I observed in the constitutional militia movement of the 90s. Along with the Oath Keepers, the Three Percenters are part of a new wave of patriot movement groups that are successors to the militia movements of the 1990s, and have had a dramatic rebirth since the 2008 election of Barack Obama to the presidency." So, yeah, the Three Percenters is a right-wing militia group, and they basically sprouted out of this other group, the Oath Keepers, in 2008 in response to the election of then President Obama. If you look at some numbers on this, a lot of right-wing militia groups also cropped up around this same exact time of Obama becoming president. And I'm sure that the thinking people watching this video can imagine why that is. I mean, probably nothing to do. They're not racist, guys. They're not racist at all. But I'm bringing this up because I've seen some content covered in the leftosphere on the subject of various like right-wing militant groups, white nationalists, groups of that nature. I've seen a few videos about the Proud Boys. I've seen a few about Soldiers of Odin. Not so much about the Three Percenters. And I won't go into too many details, but I have some personal experience with people within the Three Percenter movements and the Prepper movements as a whole, so I thought this would be an interesting subject to touch on. Going with that, what is the deal with the Three Percenters? What is the problem with them? Well, they've been in the news again recently. The militia threat shuts down Oregon State House amid walkout. So some of you might have heard this news story already. It's kind of old, but also still relevant. Apparently, a number of Oregon Republican lawmakers uh, ran away from their job because of a climate change bill, a cap and trade bill. So this article from the Associated Press details that. It says, "The presidents of the Oregon Senate ordered the state capitol to close on Saturday due to a possible militia threat from right-wing protesters as a walkout by Republican lawmakers over landmark climate change legislation dragged on. Republican senators fled the legislature, and the states earlier this week to deny the majority Democrats enough votes to take up the climate bill, which would dramatically reduce fossil fuel emissions by 2050. It would be the second program of its kind in the nation after California, if passed." So just keep that in mind when you're going through this. These Republican lawmakers ran away from their job to avoid a cap and trade bill. These are some of those alpha Republicans we're always hearing about. Very, very alpha move. Very alpha. Right-wing groups posted their support for the GOP lawmakers Friday on social media, in one instance offering to provide escorts to them should the police come for them. A group of local Republicans were set to protest inside the Capitol on Saturday when lawmakers were present and anti-government groups threatened to join, prompting the State House shutdown. One of the groups, the Oregon Three Percenters, joined an armed takeover of the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge in 2016. Dozens of people occupied the remote Oregon refuge for more than a month to protest federal control of western lands. The standoff began to unravel when authorities fatally shot the group's spokesman and arrested key leaders as they headed to a community meeting. Another story that got pretty big a few years back, where the Oregon Three Percenters took over this building. I'm sure everyone here has heard about that. The Oregon State Police has recommended that the Capitol be closed tomorrow due to a possible militia threat. Carol Curry, spokeswoman for Senate President Peter Courtney, said in an email to the AP late Friday. So, Three Percenters, along with various other prepper groups, offer to give protection to these lawmakers running away from their job. And not only did they offer protection, but a number of them threatened to attack various political figures on the Democratic side and to attack the Oregon State House. So to recap on this, militia members threatened to attack a government institution because of a cap and trade bill. This is the level of lunacy we're dealing with when it comes to the Three Percenter movement. I'm bringing up the Three Percenter movement largely because there is a huge issue with right-wing violence in the United States. Oftentimes it doesn't get reported to the extent that it should be, because it is a very large problem, as I'll highlight more as we get along in this video. And some people might be under the misconception that there's not as much to these prepper groups as it would seem, but these people's ideology does not stop at loving the Second Amendment and collecting nuts and berries for the upcoming apocalypse. That's also something that should be noted too. These are doomsday preppers. They are preparing for what they see as the inevitable collapse of society. Why society is going to collapse varies from source to source. A lot of these people dabble in the JQ, the Jewish question, Jewish conspiracies of the Jews running the world and trying to allow in immigrants from the third world in an attempt to collapse Western civilization. So something, tinfoil hat, Illuminati. So if you've ever wondered what kind of crazy tinfoil hat motherfuckers could possibly take someone like Alex Jones and InfoWars seriously, it's these people. It's the Three Percenters, doomsday preppers. These guys are the guys that buy the Alex Jones muscle pills. That's these people. So that's one story I wanted to highlight. Also, this one. Jury convicted man in Oklahoma City federal bomb plot trial. This was by Associated Press also. A 24-year-old man is guilty of trying to detonate what he believed was an explosive-laden van outside an Oklahoma City bank, a federal jury ruled Monday. Jurors convicted Jerry Drake Varnell of Sayre of attempting to use an explosive device to damage a building and attempting to use a weapon of mass destruction. Prosecutors alleged that Varnell planned to detonate what he thought was a half-ton vehicle bomb on August 12, 2017. The FBI learned of the plan, and an undercover agent, posing as someone who could help construct the device, provided inert materials. Jumping down a bit, federal investigators have been monitoring Varnell closely for months as the alleged bomb plot developed. They had received information that Varnell originally wanted to blow up the Federal Reserve Building in Washington, D.C., with a device similar to the one used in the 1995 bombing of the Oklahoma City Federal Building that killed 168 people. During a 2017 meeting with undercover FBI agents, Varnell said he held 3% ideology and wanted to, quote, start the next revolution. a reference to the Three Percenters Patriot movement, begun in 2008, galvanized by President Obama's election, that has rallied gun control efforts and pledges resistance to the federal government over the infringement of constitutional rights. So why would someone affiliated with the Three Percenter movement want to pay homage to the Oklahoma City bombing? Well, for anyone not familiar with the details of the Oklahoma City bombing, that bombing was the worst act of domestic terrorism in the United States history. It was perpetuated by a man named Timothy McVeigh. Timothy McVeigh was a hardline, right-wing, anti-government terrorist. Apparently, Timothy McVeigh was a big fan of the book The Turner Diaries, which depicted a fictional race war, which McVeigh apparently believed would eventually become a reality. So, a lot of these prepper movements, a lot of these militia groups are are uh, based largely around this kind of principle, and a lot of them harken back to the Waco massacre that happened to the Branch Davidians, and see that as an example of how the government can become tyrannical. Timothy McVeigh, if you don't know, he was directly motivated by the Waco massacre to commit the Oklahoma City bombing, and obviously the racial aspect of it likely played a large role as well in his ideology and his becoming more of an extremist. So is this is an article published by the ADL Center for Extremism. It's a group that monitors extremist activity, and they had a study that found some interesting details about violent extremist activity in the year 2018. Their findings included this. In 2018, domestic extremists killed at least 50 people in the US, a sharp increase from the 37 extremist-related murders documented in 2017, though still lower than the totals for 2015, 70, and 2016, 72. The 50 deaths make 2018 the fourth deadliest year on record for domestic extremist-related killings since 1970. The extremist-related murders in 2018 were overwhelmingly linked to right-wing extremists. Every one of the perpetrators had ties to at least one right-wing extremist movement, although one had recently switched to supporting Islamic extremism. And in case you're not familiar with that story, there was a story of a man who was a part of some kind of white nationalist group who converted to Islam and killed his white nationalist roommates. Pretty crazy shit. Anyway, the white supremacists were responsible for the great majority of the killings, which is typically the case. So, this is something that does not often get highlighted in the mainstream press, and it is something that groups like the Three Percenters want to actively deny. If you bring up the issue of right-wing extremism to a Three Percenter or any of these various other doomsday prepper groups, many of them outright deny it. There is a lot of prepper content on YouTube. I've watched way too much of it. It is awful. But a theme that many of their videos have is that anytime some kind of act of right-wing extremism happens, they will often try and claim that it is a false flag perpetuated by the governments in order to discredit their movements. In spite of the fact that many of these channels, I'm not going to post any links or show any videos because I don't want to bring attention to these detestable human beings, but many of these channels will damn near outright call for violence, if not straight up call for violence. Many of these YouTubers will talk about how the left is a disease, how we need to get rid of the left, how people on the left should be hung for treason. They will routinely make attacks on the LGBT community. They will call for acts of violence against the trans community, against gay people, against people of color. The Proud Boys being a prime example of this. The Proud Boy leader, Gavin McGinnis, openly stated that he wanted the right to become more violent and that they should go out and beat up trans people. That video is available on YouTube. You can hear it for yourself. And these groups, these prepper groups, are notorious for inciting violence. But whenever an act of violence is actually carried out by somebody on the right or associated with one of these groups, they will vehemently deny that it actually happened. But this is a real issue. 2018, every documented case of deadly terrorist attacks in the United States were perpetuated by right-wing extremists. This is a real problem. This is something that needs to be addressed. And for anyone who may have stumbled across this video who associates themselves with various prepper groups, one, I want to state that no, before you say anything, merely prepping for a disaster or what have you does not necessarily make you a white nationalist or a terrorist, obviously. But obviously, these groups' ideologies, they do not stop at just prepping for a disaster. That is not where they end. They have deeply entrenched right-wing ideologies that is obviously clearly violence. Second of all, I don't want to hear any conspiracy theories about how these 50 people who carried out these terrorist attacks and others are false flags to discredit you. When you make videos, video after video after video, about how the left is evil and needs to be eradicated from society, and how you see gay people and trans people as degenerates that need to be removed from society, and videos about how undocumented immigrants, how people trying to cross the border need to be shot on sight, all of which I have heard from these prepper YouTube channels directly from their mouths. You cannot then go around and tell me with any kind of credibility that these acts of violence are all false flags and that your movements are completely and 100% peaceful. I'm not buying that for a second. And finally, the idea that these groups, they claim to be anti-government. Many of them support the Trump administration, ironically enough. They claim to be vehemently anti-government while also supporting the Trump administration, while many of which being very supportive of the police. You'll see many of these groups with thin blue line flags. And you will hear them very frequently talk about tyranny and protecting us against government tyranny and protecting people's freedoms, their civil liberties, standing up for the Constitution. When people from your groups are killing people at an alarming rate in terrorist attacks over and over and over again, and you are spreading violent messages about immigrants, about people of color, about the LGBT community, about pro-choice people, about the left, when you are spreading these violent, hateful messages and people from with your ideological leanings are going out and killing people that do not ideologically align with you and committing acts of terror, you are not fighting tyranny. You are the tyranny. This is MK Vanguard. Thanks for watching. Till next time.